So thanks everyone, and welcome to the May edition of the You Already Own It call, the community call. I'm super excited about this topic. This is something that's been carrying a lot of energy here at the Planet team since sort of its announcement initially into preview even. No pun intended on Azure Purview. Miguel has been sort of leading our charge here from Planet on the on the data governance side and from our data estate practice. So I'm super excited to have him as a guest speaker on the You Already Own It call. Why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide for me? So as you know, your You Already Own It team, myself, Bob Ballard, Principal Cloud Strategist. We have Ken Nubler, Matt Nevins, Scott Dowling, George Scott, and of course we have Miguel joining us this week. Thank goodness we have Mary Tucker that keeps us in line and makes sure we get all our stuff posted and newsletters sent out on time and all of that. And of course, it's all under the guidance and and the purview, pardon my pun, of our Executive Vice President, Steve Winter. When we go to the next slide, Miguel. So don't forget, you guys are all You Already Own It customers. So as a benefit of the You Already Own It service, you can email the You Already Own It at go-planet.com. Email us at any time. Obviously, you have relationships with folks at Planet and feel free to maintain that. But if you don't know who to ask for, have any questions about, hey, I'd like to talk through this subject. I'm really curious about the topic that we talked about today or any topic for that matter. Feel free to reach out to the alias that goes to the entire You Already Own It team that you saw listed above. And we promise to get back to you at least with some sort of messaging within 24 hours. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel and let him get into the good stuff of Azure Purview.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for the introduction. So again, this is kind of exciting. This is fairly new, and within the data estate context of all of our organizations, the management of that data estate is a critical piece. Azure Purview, if you're not familiar with it, this is relatively, actually very new considering Microsoft. This was announced in December of last year. So, less than 6 months, we've actually been doing this, and it's currently in preview. But the purpose, of course, of Azure Purview is to provide that unified data governance across all of your data, wherever it resides, whether it's on-premises, multi-cloud, meaning Azure, AWS, and even software as a service data sources as well. We'll see this as we move forward. So be aware, and I do want to kind of caveat this a little bit. Purview is still in preview, and it's currently available in Azure Commercial. We will see that obviously move forward into government relatively soon once we actually hit GA. The idea is, and this is, I would actually say this is almost like a V3 of Microsoft's efforts into managing the entire data estate. And they've done it from different perspectives before, but this is really the first time that they've done it that meant to address all users. And so the idea is that we have, and we deal with so many clients that have so many different data silos, whether they're applications, specific Oracle databases, whether it's SAP, whether it's Azure SQL, whether it's SQL Server, whether it's data warehouses, etc., as well as bubbling that data all up into users to be able to make insightful decisions based on that data and utilize that. So there's a lot of challenges across those. The idea of actually having a single pane of glass, and I say that because we do have the Azure Purview Studio that we'll see here and talk about a little bit later on, but keep in mind that even custom abilities to actually pull that information from Purview is also available through APIs as well. So the idea is that I'm able to go ahead and discover all my data throughout the entire organization, wherever it resides, to be able to create a map of that data and the relationships between them. For instance, if I have a data warehouse that has some type of ETL and I've got a Power BI report that's pulling off of that, one of the things that's a big challenge is to know where all that data is coming from. With Azure Purview, one of the very powerful tools that we have is the ability to go ahead and see the lineage of a Power BI specific dashboard or report going all the way back to either the file or the data source or the database and where it's coming from, even through different ETLs, whether that be SSIS or ADF, etc. There's also the ability to search across and find that data using not only technical terms, i.e., for instance, if I did happen to know what the SQL Server or the table column name was, or a business term, something that's going to be more reliable to an organization. Then, of course, where is it? Where is it residing, etc. So this Azure Purview is really answering some of those challenges. And so what we're going to do is kind of take a look at some of those challenges that we deal with from 3 different roles. That's not to say those are the only roles, but really from a data consumer, the data producer, and obviously security, because we're dealing with our data, what those challenges are. And I'm not going to read this, and of course you'll be able to be able to go back and take a look at this video. I will call out that although we only have a little bit of time, I will also give a link to the Planet Perspectives blog post that has a lot of this in detail, a lot more technical detail as well, on the pieces I'm talking about near the end of the presentation. For data consumers, we've had Microsoft actually do a data catalog before, but from a data consumer, if I could go to one place and be able to find the data that I'm looking for in any type of term, it would be hugely beneficial. The challenge is that normally what they do is they stumble across that, or they find out about it by talking to someone. Hey, I need to find out, for instance, where the profit numbers are coming from for this quarter for this particular region. And so they typically have to go find the person, find the data source, and then hopefully get access to it if they do have access to it. If they have information about that data, then they have to find that expert or team, and obviously that can be difficult because they're not going to see that typically in the database itself that is responsible for that data and engage them unless they actually understand that and getting to the data source, which most data consumers may or may not be able to know how to do that technically. This provides that. That's one of those specific challenges. What about for the people that create the data or produce the data? The challenge even for them is that annotating data sources with distributed metadata is a lost effort. It's either in the client application or they ignore descriptions. You know, how many people actually truly, it's amazing to me when we work with clients that there's a description field for so many things, yet it's very rarely populated. Creating the documentation. I know that I personally am also sometimes lackadaisical around detailed documentation around data sources, and that can also be very difficult because then it's trying to explain what or understand what that is, especially as you move or shift around in the organization. Restricting access, and this is going to get into the next challenge, or at least the next roles challenge, which is the security professionals or administrators, is how do I actually ensure that the data that I'm actually providing access to or producing is going to be secured. From a security administrator perspective, they have significant responsibility to ensure that the data is being used and not being lost. This kind of crosses into DLP and other things as well. So with the organization's assets, specifically their data assets, being arguably the most important asset that they have from a technical perspective, and it's constantly growing, constantly being stored, constantly possibly being migrated from locations and shared in different ways, especially as we have SaaS applications and others that are exposing that so that it can be used to the benefit of the organization. What are the risk levels in the organization's data requirements? That is a very, very big significant. What about credit card numbers and sensitive data types? All of these things. What about being able to do that automatically or searching for that information? And of course, with any type of organization, normally they're going to be dealing with some type of compliance, whether that be a government or industry compliance, as well as their own corporate security policies, is a full-time, can be a full-time job. So those are definitely the challenges. So what I thought I would do in understanding this, and I will actually have a demo near the end, and I'm going to try and get to that very quickly, but I want you to understand what the process is in utilizing Azure Purview. So there's basically 4 steps, and I to go ahead and kind of classify one of them as steps, but that's really the use of the data. The first is actually registering the data sources. Now, the first time that you think about this, you're connecting a PaaS service, Azure Purview, to go and register all those data sources wherever they reside, on premises, and on premises could also be an IaaS situation in either a public or private cloud. You're also accessing or providing Purview that access to go ahead and scan those pieces. So I want to make sure that once we're actually doing this, that this is this is called out significantly. I'll go ahead and turn on my pointer into my nice laser pointer and point out this one statement. During that registration of the data source, the data itself is residing in its existing location. That's one. The thing that's actually being placed in Purview is a copy of the metadata that's added to Purview. And of course, that metadata we'll talk about in the next step is typically going to be enriched to get the most value out of it. All it's doing is basically storing a reference to that data source location, and that's being indexed. One thing else besides the data remaining in the existing location is I do want to point out it does not move or store customer data out of the region in which it's deployed. So one of the things that you may end up having to do, depending on how many regions you have, you may actually have multiple Azure Purview pieces or deployments or instances. That would be especially dealing with classification and so forth. But be aware that it does not move. It does not move or store any customer data out of the region in which it's deployed. So once those data sources are registered and they're scanned, and that's the term that they use in Azure Purview, and I'll try and highlight some of those terms so that you're familiar with those here throughout the presentation. The second step would be to enrich the metadata or enhance the metadata. So that is when the users or the producers can actually go ahead and add metadata so that other people can be able to get to that. Any user can annotate a data source by providing those tags or descriptions. I don't like the term tags here, but I'm only using that for people who are not familiar with Azure and the portal. This is different than Azure tags. This is literally tags or metadata tags that you have to describe the sources. And this could go all the way down to an individual column within a database table, for instance, as an example, or to a specific file in Data Lake. Then once we have, and this is this process, this enriching the metadata is an ongoing living process. This is not literally a step. But this is the metadata is going to have to be done after the data source registration, but can be done throughout the life cycle of the utilization of the data sources for the organization. Of course, once that's done, the discovery of the data catalog. And again, if you've been around Microsoft for a while, we've actually had this enterprise data catalog term before. That is where the users, the people of the organization are able to go ahead and find the data that they need to, whether that's for business intelligence reporting, whether that's for application development, whether that's data science, etc. And that doesn't matter where it resides. They can then obviously go ahead and based on that discovery of the data and where it is, are able to access the metadata. For instance, who is a steward? Who's responsible for that data? Who is the subject matter expert? And bear with me for just a second. Get that slide going. From the last piece, and I want to kind of again over this overview is what Microsoft calls insights, and I'm calling it data estate insights because it's insights on the entire Purview process and what's inside of Purview. So that actually allows for me to take a look at what has been scanned, if there have been any issues in that, what are the glossaries or the metadata that I have, classification insights, and I'm going to get in that detailed, and something that's very interesting here, sensitivity labeling insights, and file extension insights. Now, be aware those 6 insights, and I've got them listed here, are the current insights that are available in Purview, in preview, but they are extremely robust. Go ahead and move on to this. So I'm going to then, if that's the process overview, let me talk about each of the interesting or the main components of Purview. The first is the data map. And that is basically being able to look at where the data resides throughout your organization in whatever containers that you want to also create. And we'll see this in a screenshot here in just a second. it is able to take and label that sensitive data with the sensitivity label that I mentioned in the previous insight page, and then literally go ahead and provide a visual or a list view representation of that. So with that, what that looks like, this is actually, again, a screenshot of Contasso. And what they've done is they've actually got collections of data sources. So each of these are data sources, each one of these buckets here. And then these are simply collections that I have that I can also go ahead and treat as an entire entity or a container, if you will. You'll notice that although we're looking at this screen, down here, there's a significant number of other resources in this Azure and BI North America column, what we're looking at here. I want to point that out. So in this example, I've got 5 different collections, and they've literally taken and broken it down to on-premises in North America data center, European data center, Azure and BI North America, Amazon North America, and again, remember multi-cloud, and then Azure Europe. Basically, and this is only one way that I could do the collections. It does make it a little bit easier because remember that residency and region-based piece I mentioned at the top of the presentation. In each of these, you can also see that there are a significant number of different types of sources, if you will, or assets. I've got an on-premises SQL server. I've got Teradata. I've got a Hive. That's in my North American data center. In the European, I've got SAP, of course. And then in Azure and BI North America, I've got data lake storage, blob storage, Azure SQL database, files, including Power BI. That's the SaaS. So this is going to be interesting because we'll actually see where this information is going to go ahead from this Power BI report is going to go all the way back to the source and where it's coming through. I've got Amazon North America, and I've got Azure Europe with just a data lake storage out there for the European collection, if you will. There are different things. So you'll actually notice I can see that there's 5 collections across the top, but there are 1,134 sources that I'm literally pulling into this single pane of glass here. Go ahead. The second piece, that was a data map, is a data catalog. And again, this is an enhanced, significant enhanced piece off of the enterprise data catalog that we had before with Microsoft, and really just kind of it's a version piece. And the idea is the ability for anyone within the organization, and again, there is security boundaries and so forth, and I'll mention that a little bit later on, allowing for the user to be able to search for the data using, again, whatever terms they want to use, either technical and business terms. I can also, if I've actually connected sensitivity labeling or sensitivity levels, I can identify sensitivity level. I can identify classifications. And then I can actually empower any of the users, whatever their role, to use that data in the manner necessary. Now, interesting enough, in this data catalog, that's really what we actually find in the home of the Azure Purview Studio. And by the way, that is what we were looking at in these screenshots right here is Purview Studio. Notice it's not the Azure portal. It is literally a web interface to that I still have to obviously authenticate to, that allows for me to get to the Purview instance and the front end pane of glass that we use for Purview. In this example, you'll notice that the user's typed in revenue, and of course it's giving a whole bunch of search suggestions as well as asset suggestions based on the scanning that has occurred of those data sources. The other piece that I'm going to jump straight to that is extremely critical is the Purview Insights. And think of this as, again, you've seen Microsoft use insights as a kind of reporting, whether it's application insights, et cetera, for other types of things. But the Purview Insights, or what I like to prefer to call data estate insights, it allows for me to go ahead and provide information on my scanning, i.e. my data sources. Am I actually running into problems in the scanning where I'm not able to access something for some reason, maybe security or something else? That's more for the administrators of actually for the Purview. Do I want to take a look at all the sensitivity levels that have been linked in and brought in from my Microsoft Information Protection, or previously known as AIP, Azure Information Protection? What about the classification? Remember, classification and sensitivity are going to be two separate things, and we'll see that. As well as the ability to go ahead and take a look at pipelines of data, whether that be ETL or ELT pipelines that are coming from extracting data from the raw sources, maybe massaging them or transferring them or even copying them into different stores, whether that be Data Lake or Azure Synapse, analytics, etc. So in taking a look at insights, remember there's 6 different insights. What I've done is I've got this in several different perspectives, but the one that I'm actually showing first is arguably one of the most important things that I get excited about. I say that there's a lot of things to get excited about, sensitivity labels, etc. This one is basically I've done a search for revenue. Remember that search that we talked about on the previous screenshot? And I actually clicked on revenue by customer, and then I'm looking at campaign analytics, which is a Power BI dashboard. And if you'll take a look, I can see that this Power BI dashboard, and it's even giving me where the workspace is actually being brought in by 2 different reports that are coming from 2 different data sets and all in the Power BI workspace. Okay. In this example, I've got campaign revenue and digital campaign, and I've got those coming from different data sources, and it's actually tracing it back to where it's coming from. So you'll notice I've got revenue by customer and digital campaign in the data warehouse, but prior to that, I've got an ADF preparation and transform pipeline that's pulling it from 3 different sources: SAP, SQL, and as well as on a cloud-based source. I've also got web logs, so I'm actually pulling from blob storage and actually prepping, transforming to create this. I can literally click on any one of these. If this is the one that I'm currently highlighted, but if I were to click on any one of these during this lineage piece, and this is what we're looking at here is a lineage, I could then switch to that data source or that element and find out looking forward and backwards. From a user's perspective, that user can now know, I know exactly where this data is coming from. I can click on that, find out who those people are that are responsible for it, the stewards and or the subject matter expert, if you will, or the experts, and find out every information as to where that data is coming from. Now that, again, I'm showing this is actually the lineage of a asset, if you will, within Purview. If I drill down into the insights, and by the way, over here, you'll notice this is the insights piece here, and I'll show that when we jump into the demo. There are, as I mentioned, currently 6 different Purview insights, and those are assets, scans, glossary, classification, sensitivity labels, and file extensions. So assets are all of the assets, and one of the things that I'm able to do is see all the things that are discovered, what the source types are. As you'll notice, I see Azure Blob Storage, Data Lake Storage, Azure Files, different pieces that could be SQL Server, etc. If I click on scans, I can actually get more information on those scans specifically of what they are doing. If I take a look further in the assets, and by that I mean click on View More, I can get in and list each of those assets and actually see the total number of assets for the source type that I've actually connected to. If I take a look, and you'll notice I've skipped over a couple of these just for time, but the scan gets into more from the administrative perspective of what are the successful scans. I will show you what that looks like when I jump into the demo. In this example, I'm now taking a look down to glossary insights. This is the metadata. So I can actually see the terms that have assets and terms that don't have assets, what are incomplete, whether there's a missing definition or they're missing multiple, there's a missing steward or a missing expert, for instance. And these are examples, but notice I can drill down even further in all of these. And of course, using the pills above, I can go ahead and source that down if I needed to. In this example, I'm looking for the stewards, total terms, approved terms with assets, and we'll get into a little bit about what terms look like, because I'll show you how you can customize your terms as well further. As well with the terms under the glossary. Now this is, I've actually shifted from the insights up to the actual glossary. You'll notice, and you'll actually see this one, I've actually used this one in my demo as well, is that I've got the formal name, a definition of it, when it was last updated, when it was created, all the information, and then I can actually see what assets are associated with that particular term. This term is actually within a term set or called the system default. But again, that's the base one. We can create our own custom ones, and I will be doing that here in just a second to show you. Back to insights on the classification. So we're looking at the glossary. Now we're looking at classification, and I can actually see there are classification categories. Now these I can create rules for classification. I'm looking at 2 different subscriptions. I've got 86 unique classifications found. There's 10 sources classified, files classified. I got almost 44,000, and tables, i.e. database tables, are 29 of those have been classified. And then I can take a look and drill down into additional classification categories, the total sources classified within the last 30 days, etc. I can then jump over, and this is an example of classifications here. World cities. These are different categories. I can create categories, create classifications, and of course they have all the standard ones that you have out of the box as well. I'm going to go ahead and jump down to sensitive labels. This is where I get very excited as well. So if you're not familiar with Azure Information Protection, or AIP, or now known as Microsoft Information Protection, that is a Microsoft 365 service. That is something you control and manage from there. However, with that sensitivity labeling, you have the ability to connect Azure Purview to your Microsoft 365 MIP. And what that's known as is extending the MIP to Azure, so that those sensitivity labels can be applied to sources and assets within those sources. In this example, we've got 2 subscriptions, again, unique labels, secret, Babylon demo, highly confidential, Contasso FTD. There's 5 sources that are labeled, and files, 27,000 of those have been labeled. And those are coming from different sources that may even be seen from either Microsoft 365 or just pure Azure from a data perspective. And there are the 3 that we actually saw. Again, this is bringing it across. I have to tell you, this is going to be nothing until you connect it or extend your Microsoft Information Protection into that. One other thing that that I do want to call out, and Ken Newbler, one of the cloud strategists, also, we were discussing this the other day, is it does require to be able to do the auto scanning. It does require AIP P2, or Azure Information Protection Plan P2. That's included in E5 or G5 if when it does hit government. But I do want to call that out to be able to use the sensitivity labels to tag, if you will, or label sensitivity type of data sources. That does not have anything to do with glossary or classification. These are definitely separate things here as well. I am showing this as an example as well, that I can even get down to what file types, what file extensions are being shown and done. Be aware, not all file types can be scanned from a search engine. A good example of that would be a zip. Currently, zip is not shown, and I'll show you that here in the demo when I get to that very shortly. And the example, of course, is not supported. Content scanning is not supported. This obviously supporting for most of your office, all of your Office files. MSG, PNG, for instance, wouldn't be a content scanning piece. How many subscriptions have that, and what those sources are as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here and come over to the demo. Let me jump over here and just check to make sure I don't have any questions going on in the chat. Oh, wow. Safe links. Is that Bob? Did you get that?
Yeah, I posted it. It's your blog post. That's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it looks a little cryptic. I will show that here in just a second.
Yeah, it because I got it from a email post. It's actually protected. It's protected with the Office 365 suite of products so that it's a safe one. But it will work.
I may even be able to do something with that too. So let me jump back over, come over here, and that may look a little bit better. As far as
you go ahead with your, there you go. Yep.
I am doing that. Yes, sir. But I put that in the chat just because I have that on another screen. So I had that available for you. Okay, let me go ahead and jump in. So really quick, I am looking at the Azure portal. For those who are not familiar with the Azure portal, this is not what you typically go ahead and take a look at, but I did want for the technical folks to be aware of kind of what this looks like architecturally, at least from a demo perspective. In this particular instance, I have 2 resource groups. I've got one that's dedicated just to the Purview instance, which is pview-demo here. And then I have another resource group that I put some data in here. Again, this is not going to be as robust as you saw in the screenshots prior. I don't have Azure in Europe, etc. So I've got a storage account that is Azure Data Lake Gen 2. I've got blob storage, and I'm actually connected to a data factory. That's so I can show the lineage as well. That's actually pushing information from the blob over to ADLS. I do want to point out that once I actually go to the actual Purview instance, this is what it looks like from an Azure portal perspective. But this is where we actually see what the Azure Purview Studio looks like. I'm going to go ahead and log on. And what I want you to go ahead and understand is that this right here is the common web UI URL to be able to access Purview Studio. I've renamed this. By default, it's going to be the name of the instance. I've renamed this to make this nice and pretty to be able to take a look at it. Up here, there's a couple things I do want to point out. There is the ability to take a look at information within the Azure Purview environment, as well as help, etc. In this example, I'm looking at searching the catalog. So I'm at the home. This is where your catalog, I can start going ahead and searching. I will do that in just a second. I'm going to go through these tabs over here. In fact, let me stand this out so you can kind of see that. Your data catalog or the home is where I can go ahead and search that information. The data map will show all the data sources that I've connected to or registered, if you will. I can also create collections, as you saw in our other screenshot, and I could switch this over to from a map view or to a table view and actually take a look at that. Again, this should be very understand that data is coming from these locations. The data factory is not a source, but it will be used to take a look at from a lineage perspective. The glossary, I have actually imported terms, so I have a whole bunch of terms, but I also wanted to point out that you have the ability to create custom terms. And this one, I have created one. This is a system one. This is the custom one that I've actually done, and it basically is a new template that includes everything off of system, but also includes a new attribute or sensitivity level is the name of this. And it has two attributes. It's got is sensitive information with a single choice of yes or no, and can be shared externally. You'll see what I associate that here in just a few minutes as well. As I mentioned, we do have our insights, and those are our 6 insight reports. I can go ahead and click on scans, and I didn't show you this before, so I was going to go ahead and do this now. I can actually take a look at what the success scan was. This is I did a couple of these today, one here and one here, and you can see how long it took and whether there were any failed counts or something that actually occurred. I come back to insights. I can actually take a look at all the different glossary terms. So this is going to give me insights or reporting on the glossary that I've defined up here as well. The classification, do I have any classification? I do, and I've actually used these things. I've got one subscription, of course, unique classifications. I can take a look at those classifications and and look at those as well. I didn't wait long enough to have it populate, but give it a second. I'll let that happen. There's the ones I have specifically in here. Now, as I mentioned, right now this is not connected. Sensitivity labels would be great in a demo environment, but I don't have a sensitivity, an E5 account that I've actually connected this to. But this is where the sensitivity labels would actually be brought in and it'd be labeled or mapped to your data sources. And finally, file extensions. And again, I can take a look at all of the different file extensions I have in my data sources right here. Let me come back up to data catalog and let me kind of show you a couple things here. So I'm going to go ahead and do, as you can see, it shows all my, and as I'm typing this, it's actually giving me both search suggestions as well as asset suggestions. And I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these. Let me go ahead and click on the data lake storage. And if you'll notice, I have this at Contasso gross profit that's coming from the Gen 2 file system starter 1, which is coming from a Gen 2 Azure Data Lake Gen 2 service and the Azure storage account. By the way, this is relatively new. This hierarchy is actually relatively new. I can take a look at properties, get the specific information about it, look at even the schema. And this is, of course, I could be doing this if I was looking at a SQL database table, for instance. But the interesting piece, again, is that ADF that you saw, that is simply just a copy from the blob storage to the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. In the screenshot you saw that there was a pull directly from Azure Data Lake into the Power BI source and a data set that was then used to go ahead and create the report that actually had the dashboard. If I want to, I can still go ahead and switch this asset, and the same thing is available. If this actually asset was feeding other pieces or connected to other pieces, I would see the lineage across all of those, looking at it from the perspective of the blob resource set here, gross profit. In contacts, you do have experts and owners in this particular set. And then if there are related fields, which there are 39 related fields, all specific to or related to those items. The storage count, this is a data blob, and then obviously starter one, which is what is my sample data set, if you will. Let me go down to the glossary really quick, and I do want to point out this whole thing. So I'm going to jump over to manage term templates, and I already pointed this out before, where I have a managed a new template here called sensitivity level. You'll notice there is another one here called sensitivity level. I left this in specifically to show two things. One, these things are actually identical. They actually have the same attributes, but this one is actually expired. So if I were to, and this one is active. What does that mean? When I actually create term templates, I cannot delete them. They're always going to be there, but they can be expired. In fact, if I come over here and take a look at this, I can see the attribute names I can add to this. But if I mark as expired, one of the things it says is it will no longer be in use and cannot be reactivated. It's a one-time thing. Terms created previously will still have the attributes in this term template if I were to associate that. Now with this, I do want to say how easy it is to create custom templates. If I go back over and manage term templates and a custom, and I go new, and I were to say test here, I could then go ahead, give it a description, and add attributes to it that would actually be allowed for it to be utilized in my data as well. Let me go and jump over to show you where I've associated that though with data. So I'm going to go ahead and type in SSN, and you'll notice this has sensitivity level. If I come over here and take a look at this, this is currently in draft mode. This is a social security number. That's the definition. Acronym. Catalog assets, currently none there because again, it's in draft mode. If I go ahead and click on edit, I have a whole bunch of things that I can do here. One that's brand new as of just about 5 weeks ago, Microsoft has enabled hierarchical glossary terms. So you'll notice that there's a parent here, and I'm not going to do that right now because when I created this, the data set was actually meant to be flat, and you'll see this when I go back to take a look at it. Acronyms, I can add multiple. I can actually specify resources. I can specify related. If I want to go ahead and add other synonyms or related terms, that would be where I do that. And then I have the ability for the experts and the stewards as well. If I want to go ahead and publish this or approve it, I could do that. Again, with the role that I have, not any user can do that, of course. Let me go ahead and cancel out of here. And I want to do one more thing, and that is just to touch on management. So if you'll notice, there's a bunch of information. This is a friendly name. So if I wanted to go ahead and say Miguel Wood's Azure Purview demo, I could go ahead and say, and of course, it's going to change that nice and friendly name when we go back to the home. There's other things here that are available. I do want to call out what's happening here with Azure Purview. And I'm watching the time, and I don't think there's any questions. Please let me know, or do not hesitate to come off mute and ask me if you have any questions. This actually shows all the updates around Purview. So back in December, it was announced. We actually have additional regions, but in March, they made some significant changes, including the hierarchical glossary terms I mentioned that is now available. And then being able to register entire Azure subscriptions and or resource groups with Azure Purview. So rather than having to go and click on an individual asset or an individual piece, if I have a data subscription or a data resource group that has the assets in there that I need to scan, I can literally go ahead and register those things and treat them as an entire unit. That also helps from a residency or region perspective. There's also resource up. These things are going to keep on coming out before we actually hit general availability. One thing that I've been waiting for is this resort pattern rules. In other words, being able to match patterns, and this is a very powerful thing. But this is just about a month old. The last thing I want to mention here that people always ask about is pricing. So keep in mind we've got different pieces. Right now, of course, it's in preview, so it's very, very inexpensive, free in preview. There is 3 different components you need to think about. One is the data map, one is the scanning and classification, and then last is the Purview data catalog. Those are the 3 different pieces I kind of mentioned. I mentioned data map and data catalog. So from a data map perspective, keep in mind this is actually extracts and stores that extracts that data from existing data stores. So there is a capacity unit hour, and basically it's kind of giving you an idea. 1 API per second is a 1 capacity unit. Kind of gives you what the cost is going to be. Right now, metadata storage is free in preview. This is where the metadata is being stored in your Azure Purview. And I mentioned that's a separate, it's not the data being stored, but just the metadata. For scanning and classification, Power BI Online and SQL Server On-Prem, actually free. It's 63 cents per 1 vCore hour for other data sources, wherever they may reside. And last but not least, the data catalog. This is included with the data map, search and browse for assets, business glossary, lineage visualization, and catalog insights. That's a C1. And the sensitive data identification insights, that's the sensitivity labels, is actually also free in preview. All this is a free in preview. I urge you, if you're going to be taking a look at this, especially while it's there, is to go ahead and utilize this, especially if you've invested in sensitivity labels in your Microsoft Identity Protection. With that, I'm going to jump back, and I don't know if any other questions have actually come. Yes, Bob, just to clarify, MIP Plan 2 is currently available in GCC. That is correct. It's Purview that's currently not yet available in GCC. Any questions? Bring back up the.
While that's coming back up, Miguel, there was every time I watch you present on this, I get more and more excited, to be honest, from a number of perspectives. But the as the guy who spends a lot of time in our very most secure customers, the ability to extend labeling and sensitivity types into your actual data sets themselves is something that, while I don't think it will be the first thing that people do, is of tremendous value to sort of understand and protect that content.
Absolutely. So one of the, again, I think it's difficult sometimes for people to understand the challenges unless you've truly dealt with the data at a management perspective of, again, we're thinking so many times we think of this data estate as SQL database and Oracle database and SAP. Do not forget this applies to files as well. This is not a structured data piece. Data estate includes structured and non-structured, i.e. files as well. So if I'm able to go ahead and scan my Microsoft 365 services as well, and those repositories, and be able to take a look at one place where all those labels are being used and they're used identically across other data sets, whether they be structured or unstructured, it is significant to be able to go ahead and control and manage those things, as well as make it understandable, easily understandable by all users, whatever their role of the data within the organization.
So we'll have one last call for questions. Anybody out there with any questions, concerns?
I know it's just before the weekend. Y'all have the link to the blog that gets much more technical that just got published, I think today. That goes into, you'll see some of the similar screenshots you had in there today, but also goes into a lot more of the technical aspects, as well as some best practices I put in there if you're going to go down that path of even standing up a Purview instance during preview. I highly urge you to take a look at that, by the way.
Awesome. Thanks. Miguel. With
Sure.
that, we'll give everybody 10 minutes back. That was a lot of content to cover and still come up with 10 minutes left. So thanks for that, getting all that out there and sharing Purview with our You Already Own It community, Miguel. Everyone have a great holiday weekend. We'll be sending out our typical follow-up so that, if you have other folks in your organization that want to watch this video, um, share the blog posts, etc., with them. That will all be coming in the follow-up communications. And thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic holiday weekend.